The air in the reception area of Thorn Automotive's flagship service center was sterile, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and ozone. It was less a garage lobby and more the atrium of a modern art museum, where the sculptures just happened to have 4 wheels and 7-figure price tags. Polished concrete floors reflected the gallery-style lighting, making the rows of silent, gleaming hypercars look like predators at rest. This was a place where wealth was not just displayed, but serviced and maintained with a reverence bordering on religious. Into this temple of automotive perfection stormed Evelyn Reed. She was a vision of curated opulence, her platinum blonde hair coiffed into a severe but flawless arrangement, her silk blouse the color of champagne, and a diamond on her finger large enough to be a paperweight. Her face, tightened by years of expensive procedures, was pinched into a mask of pure, undiluted fury. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the concrete floor, a sound of sharp impatience that cut through the hushed atmosphere. Every head in the waiting area, a collection of similarly affluent patrons, turned to watch the impending storm. They recognized her. Evelyn Reed was not just wealthy, she was the wife of Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Consolidated, a logistics empire whose entire fleet of executive vehicles and transport trucks was serviced under a massive, exclusive contract with Thorn Automotive. Her presence demanded attention. Her anger promised a spectacle. Her target was the man standing calmly by the service desk. He was the complete antithesis of his surroundings. He wore simple, dark blue coveralls, stained with the honest grime of his trade. Grease was smudged on his cheek and embedded deep under his fingernails. He was a tall black man, his hair cut short, his frame lean but strong. His most striking feature was his eyes. They were dark, steady, and held a quiet depth that seemed entirely out of place amidst the frantic energy radiating from Evelyn. He looked up from the tablet in his hands as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You," she snapped, her voice a venomous hiss. She did not use his name. She did not care to know it. To her, he was just a part of the machinery, a faceless uniform. The man's name was Marcus Thorn. And he owned it all. Every polished floor, every specialized tool, every multi-million-dollar contract, including the one with her husband's company. He owned the very ground she stood on. She, of course, had no idea. She saw a poor black mechanic, a menial laborer who was, in her mind, beneath her notice and deserving of her contempt. "My car," she demanded, gesturing vaguely toward the service bay doors. "The Pagani. It was supposed to be ready an hour ago. I have a luncheon. Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus looked at the tablet, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He swiped a finger across the screen. "Mrs. Reed. Your Huayra is undergoing a complex diagnostic. There's a subtle misfire in cylinder 7 that we're trying to isolate. We want to be sure before we return it." His voice was calm, a low baritone that carried a natural authority. It was a voice that did not plead or apologize, but simply stated facts. This calmness seemed to infuriate her even more. "A misfire," she scoffed, her laugh sharp and humorless. "I bring a $2 million work of art to you for a simple tune-up, and you tell me it has a misfire? It was running perfectly when I brought it in. What did you do to it? Did your clumsy hands break my car?" The accusation hung in the silent air, ugly and sharp. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably. They had all dealt with the staff here. They knew the level of professionalism. Thorn Automotive's mechanics were the best in the world, recruited from Formula One pits and boutique supercar manufacturers. But Evelyn Reed was a hurricane of privilege, and no one wanted to be caught in her path. So they watched. Marcus felt the familiar sting. It was not a sting of personal insult. He had felt that long ago, in a different life. This was the sting of disappointment. The ugly, predictable poison of prejudice. He had started this company, built it from a single garage into a global standard-bearer, on a foundation of respect. Respect for the machines, and respect for the people who worked on them. He often spent one day a month on the floor of one of his garages, unannounced. He did it to stay connected to the craft, to understand the challenges his people faced, and to see his company from the ground up. It was on days like this that he was reminded of why he had to. "Ma'am," he said, his voice still level. "We did not damage your vehicle. These are complex machines. Sometimes underlying issues only present themselves during a full diagnostic sequence. My team is being thorough to ensure your safety." "Your team," she spat, her eyes raking over his grease-stained coveralls with open disgust. "You are the one I'm talking to. You are the one responsible. I don't pay for excuses. I pay for results. Or rather, my husband does." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Let me make this very simple for you. My husband's company, Reed Consolidated, has a contract with this establishment worth tens of millions of dollars a year. That contract pays for the lights in this building. It pays for your tools. It pays your salary." She paused, letting the weight of her threat settle. She looked him directly in the eye, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "I'm the one who pays your salary," she said, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. "And I can be the one to make sure you don't have one by tomorrow. Now, are you going to fetch my car, or do I need to make a phone call that will ruin your life?" The silence in the room was now absolute. It was a moment of pure, unprovoked cruelty. A display of power for its own sake. The other customers stared, some with faint, pitying looks toward Marcus, others with a glint of morbid curiosity. They were witnessing a public execution of a man's dignity. Marcus did not flinch. He did not look angry. He did not look scared. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady. Inside, a deep, cold certainty settled over him. He had seen this before. This arrogance. This belief that money and status were a shield against consequence. He had built his entire life, his entire empire, as a monument against this very idea. He tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. It was a single word, spoken softly, but it landed in the silent room like a physical blow. Evelyn Reed's perfectly sculpted face contorted in disbelief. She was not used to being told no. Especially not by someone she considered an insect. "What did you just say to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I said no," Marcus repeated, his voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "I will not return a vehicle that may be unsafe. I will not be threatened. And you," he added, his eyes holding hers, "do not pay my salary." The sheer audacity of his defiance left her speechless for a moment. Her mind struggled to process it. The mechanic, the grease monkey, was defying her. Her fury, denied its expected result, boiled over into a new, more dangerous form. She would not just have him fired. She would humiliate him. She would break him in front of everyone. A wicked idea sparked in her eyes. "Fine," she said, a chilling smile spreading across her face. She turned to the small crowd of onlookers, raising her voice to ensure they were all part of the drama. "Fine. You think you're so competent. You think you know what you're doing. This underlying issue that none of your so-called experts could find before. You fix it. Right now." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at him. "You say you can't isolate the problem. I say you're incompetent. So let's make a little wager." The crowd leaned in. This was better than reality television. "You have 1 hour," she declared. 1 hour to personally diagnose and fix my car. Not your team, Hugh. Alone. She looked around the room, her smile widening. "If you succeed, I will. I will personally write a check to the charity of your choice for $100,000. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a significant sum, a grand gesture. "But if you fail," she continued, her voice dripping with malice, if at the end of 1 hour that car is not running perfectly, you will get down on your knees, right here, in front of everyone. You will kiss my shoes. And you will beg for my forgiveness for wasting my time. The cruelty of the wager was breathtaking. It was designed for one purpose: utter, soul-crushing humiliation. She was so certain of his failure. The Pagani's engine was a notoriously complex piece of Italian engineering. Even the best factory technicians often needed days to trace an electronic ghost like a phantom misfire. One man, alone, in 1 hour. It was impossible. She had set an impossible trap. And she was glowing with the certainty of her victory. All eyes turned to Marcus. They expected him to refuse, to shrink away, to call a manager. He did none of those things. He simply stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching. He looked at her, at the smug, cruel confidence on her face. He looked at the watching crowd, their faces a mixture of pity and eager anticipation. He thought of his journey. He let his mind drift back, just for a second, to a different time, a different place. The memory was vivid, filled with the scent of hot asphalt and high-octane fuel. He was younger then, his hands just as stained, but with the grit of a Formula One paddock, not a commercial garage. He had been a prodigy, the youngest chief engineer in the sport's history, the mind behind 2 consecutive world championships. His name had been spoken with reverence in the closed, elite circles of motorsport. He remembered the boy, Leo. A driver with more heart than talent, but with a fire in his eyes that Marcus had recognized. He had taken Leo under his wing, mentored him, and engineered a car that was faster than anyone thought possible. He had believed in him. He remembered the final race of the season, the rain coming down in sheets at Spa-Francorchamps. He remembered the frantic chatter on the radio, the data streaming across his monitors. He had seen the anomaly, a microscopic fracture in a suspension component, stressed by the wet conditions. It was a 1 in a million chance. He had made the call. Box, Leo, box now. We have a problem. But Leo, just corners from a championship victory, had replied with youthful arrogance. I've got this, Marcus. It feels fine. Don't you trust me? It was the same arrogance he saw in Evelyn Reed's eyes now. The same blind faith in one's own importance, the same dismissal of expert warning. The memory of the crash was a silent, searing flash in his mind. The car disintegrating against the barrier at Eau Rouge. The sudden, terrible silence on the radio. Leo was gone. After that, the trophies and the championships meant nothing. The thrill was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. He had walked away from it all, from the fame, the money, the adrenaline. He had disappeared. He used his fortune, earned from patents and championship bonuses, to build something new. Something with a different purpose. Thorn Automotive was born from that grief. It was built on the principle that had been ignored on that rainy day in Belgium, a principle of meticulous care, of unwavering integrity, of respect for the machine and the lives that depended on it. He had built an empire dedicated to preventing the kind of tragedy that had shattered his life. An empire where thoroughness was valued above all else. And he stayed on the floor, in his coveralls, to honor the work itself. To remember Leo. To ensure that no one in his company, from the CEO to the newest apprentice, ever forgot that their work was more than just tightening bolts. It was a sacred trust. Evelyn Reed's petty, vicious challenge was not just an insult to him as a man. It was an insult to the very foundation of his life's work. It was a mockery of the memory he held sacred. His focus snapped back to the present. The cold certainty inside him solidified into something hard and sharp, like a diamond. He would not just win this wager. He would use it to teach a lesson. A lesson that would be remembered here, in this room, for a very long time. He met Evelyn Reed's triumphant gaze. The terms are not acceptable, he said quietly. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She thought he was trying to back out. Too scared, she taunted. The terms are not high enough, Marcus clarified, his voice resonating with a new, chilling authority. The room, which had been murmuring, fell silent once more. Your $100,000 donation is quaint, he said, the word hanging in the air with dismissive weight. Let's make it more interesting. He took a step forward. When I fix your car in under 1 hour, you will still make that donation. But you will also issue a formal, public apology to the entire staff of this facility for your behavior today. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intense, I want the Reed consolidated contract. The full, multi-year, exclusive service contract for your husband's entire global fleet. Evelyn stared at him, bewildered. You want the contract? What are you going to do with it? Use it as a napkin? If I win, your husband's company will sever its contract with Thorn Automotive. All of it. Effective immediately. You will personally announce this decision to your husband. The audacity was staggering. He was asking her to wager her husband's logistical stability, a contract worth tens of millions, on the skill of a single mechanic. It was insane. And it was brilliant. He knew something she didn't. He knew that Thorn Automotive held the exclusive patents on the diagnostic and maintenance software used in Reed Consolidated's custom, high-security armored vehicles. Breaking that contract wouldn't be a simple matter of finding a new garage. It would cripple their fleet. It would cost them hundreds of millions in the long run. He was loading a cannon and handing her the match. And if you win? She asked, her voice a near whisper, caught between disbelief and a dawning, thrilling sense of absolute victory. She thought he had just handed her the world. If I fail, Marcus said, his gaze unwavering, I will perform the forfeit you described. And I will personally tender my resignation. He was putting his own job on the line. To her, it seemed a laughably small price to pay against the fortune she was about to save her husband. She saw no risk. Only the sweet, impending triumph of his complete and utter humiliation. You have a deal, she sneered, extending a hand as if to seal a corporate takeover. Marcus ignored her hand. I accept, he said. The words echoed in the silent atrium. A point of no return had been crossed. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked toward the service bay. He pressed a button, and the large glass door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing the cathedral-like workshop beyond. The bay was as clean as a surgical theater. Tools were laid out in perfect order, and the floor was an immaculate gray epoxy. In the center, under a bank of brilliant LED lights, sat the Pagani Huayra. It was a masterpiece of carbon fiber and titanium, its gull-wing doors open like a resting bird of prey. Evelyn and the crowd of onlookers followed, keeping a safe distance, their phones suddenly out and recording. This was a spectacle they would not miss. The clock starts now, Evelyn announced, her voice filled with venomous glee as she started a timer on her gold-encrusted smartphone. Marcus paid her no mind. He approached the car not as a mechanic, but as a surgeon approaching a patient. There was no hesitation. No wasted movement. He didn't reach for a wrench or a diagnostic computer. Instead, he simply stood beside the exposed engine, a quad-turbo V12 marvel of engineering, and closed his eyes. He was listening. Not with his ears, but with a deeper sense. He was feeling the subtle vibrations of the machine, the memory of its rhythm. He had helped Horacio Pagani's team troubleshoot the initial fuel mapping on this very engine block years ago, as a private consultant, long before it ever went into full production. He knew its secrets. He knew its soul. The crowd watched, confused. Was this part of the act? Was he praying? Evelyn let out a small, contemptuous chuckle. Having a little nap, she mocked. The clock is ticking. Marcus opened his eyes. He walked to a large, rolling toolbox, his movements fluid and economical. His hands, which had seemed clumsy and grimy just moments before, now moved with the grace and precision of a concert pianist. He didn't grab a handful of tools. He selected only 3, a specific type of stethoscope, a custom-forged torque wrench, and a small, fiber-optic camera. He returned to the engine. He placed the stethoscope not on the engine block, but on the carbon fiber chassis itself, near the firewall. He closed his eyes again, listening intently. The onlookers saw a man holding a tool to a car. Marcus heard a symphony. He heard the quiet hum of the fuel pumps, the faint electronic whisper of the ignition coils, the near-silent hiss of the vacuum lines. And beneath it all, he heard a discordant note. A tiny, almost imperceptible flutter. It was not a mechanical sound. It was electrical. A harmonic resonance that did not belong. He had heard it before, on a test bench in Maranello, a ghost in the machine that had driven a team of Ferrari engineers mad for a week. He knew what it was. He opened his eyes and moved to the driver's side. He didn't get in. He simply reached in and tapped the central touchscreen display, navigating through a series of menus with a speed that suggested he had designed the software himself. Which, in part, he had. He accessed a hidden diagnostic log, a backdoor he had insisted on for all systems his company serviced. A string of code appeared on the screen. To the onlookers, it was gibberish. To Marcus, it was a confession. The misfire in cylinder 7 was real. But it wasn't caused by a faulty spark plug or a failing injector, as a normal diagnostic would suggest. The log showed a microscopic voltage fluctuation in the wiring harness, but only when the engine's temperature exceeded 90 degrees Celsius and the ambient humidity was below 40%. It was a 1 in a million flaw in the wiring insulation, a tiny imperfection from the factory, so small that it only became a problem under a specific set of environmental conditions. Conditions that happened to be identical to the climate-controlled air of the Thorn Automotive Service Bay. The car had seemed fine outside. But in here, it developed a phantom illness. This was the kind of problem that could take weeks to find. Marcus had found it in less than 5 minutes. Now, he had to fix it. He walked back to the engine bay. With a surgeon's precision, he began to unclip a section of the main wiring harness, a thick bundle of wires wrapped in protective sheathing. His fingers worked deftly, confidently. The initial mockery from the crowd had long since faded. The silence was now one of stunned awe. They were not watching a mechanic. They were watching a master at his craft. Every movement had a purpose. There was a sublime economy to his actions, a beauty in his competence. Evelyn Reed's smug smile had vanished. It had been replaced by a tight, strained line. A knot of unease was forming in her stomach. This was not going as planned. The bumbling oaf she had intended to humiliate was moving with an impossible, terrifying confidence. She watched his hands, mesmerized against her will. They were no longer the hands of a laborer. They were the hands of an artist. Marcus located the exact wire from the schematics in his mind. He did not need to consult a manual. He was the manual. He used a small blade to carefully strip a minuscule section of the insulation. Then, using the fiber optic camera, he inspected the copper beneath. And there it was. A hairline fracture in the wire, barely visible to the naked eye. A tiny flaw that was causing a universe of problems. He could have replaced the entire harness. That would be the standard, time-consuming procedure. He did not have time for that. He went back to his toolbox and returned with a specialized soldering iron and a spool of silver content solder. He performed a microsolder, a technique usually reserved for circuit boards, right there in the engine bay. His hand was as steady as a rock. The tiny, perfect bead of solder he applied was a work of art in itself. He then sealed the repair with a drop of industrial-grade epoxy. The entire procedure, from diagnosis to repair, had taken 27 minutes. He reclipped the harness into place, secured the engine cover, and wiped his hands on a clean rag. He walked back to the driver's side, this time sliding gracefully into the low-slung seat. The crowd held its breath. Evelyn Reed was pale. Her heart was pounding. It was impossible. He couldn't have fixed it. He was bluffing. He had to be bluffing. Marcus placed the key in the ignition. He turned it. The Pagani's V12 engine roared to life. But it was not the same sound as before. The rough, sputtering note was gone. This was a perfect, clean, ferocious roar. A pure, unadulterated symphony of power. It idled with the steady, rhythmic hum of a perfectly tuned machine. He gave the throttle a gentle blip, and the engine screamed, a sound that echoed through the bay like thunder. It was flawless. Marcus switched off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He slid out of the seat and stood before the car. He looked at Evelyn Reed. Her face was a mask of shock and dawning horror. Her phone, still displaying the timer, slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor. The timer read, 31 minutes and 42 seconds. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a single person in the crowd began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Soon, another joined in, and then another, until the entire room, the entire gallery of wealthy patrons, erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause. They were applauding not just the feat of skill, but the sheer, undeniable justice of the moment. They were applauding the quiet man in the greasy coveralls who had just performed a miracle. Evelyn Reed heard none of it. All she heard was the roaring in her own ears. The sound of her world beginning to crumble. "How?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "How did you do that?" Marcus walked calmly toward her, stopping a few feet away. The applause died down, the crowd eager to hear the final verdict. "I told you," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "We are thorough." He then turned to the garage manager, a man named Daniel who had been watching from the edge of the bay, his face a mixture of awe and terror for what Evelyn had done. Daniel knew exactly who Marcus was. He was the only one in the room who did. "Daniel," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming the voice of a CEO. "Mrs. Reed has some contractual matters to discuss. Perhaps you could clarify our position." Daniel, a sharp man in a tailored suit, stepped forward, his face grim. He looked at Evelyn with an expression devoid of all sympathy. "Mrs. Reed," Daniel began, his voice formal and cold. "As per the terms of the wager you so publicly initiated, and which we have on no fewer than a dozen video and audio recordings, you have lost." He paused. "The $100,000 donation to the Mechanics Benevolent Fund is now due. And your public apology to my staff is expected momentarily." Evelyn's face was ashen. She opened her mouth to speak, to threaten, to rage, but Daniel continued, his voice cutting through her unspoken protests. "But more importantly," he said, gesturing back toward Marcus, "you made a wager for the Reed Consolidated Global Services contract. A contract you have now lost. That's ridiculous." Evelyn finally shrieked, finding her voice. "He's a mechanic. He can't accept a contract. I'll have my husband call your boss. I'll have you all fired." A grim smile touched Daniel's lips. He looked at Marcus, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It was time." "Ma'am," Daniel said, his voice ringing with theatrical clarity. "You seem to be under a misapprehension as to whom you have been speaking with." He gestured grandly toward Marcus. "Allow me to introduce you. This is not just a mechanic. This is Mr. Marcus Thorne. Founder, CEO, and sole owner of Thorne Industries, the parent company of Thorne Automotive Worldwide." The name dropped into the room like a bomb. Thorne. Marcus Thorne. The reclusive genius. The legend from Formula One who had vanished and built a global empire. A man whose net worth was rumored to be in the billions. A man who was notoriously private, whose face was unknown to the public. The crowd gasped collectively. Jaws literally dropped. People looked from the man in the greasy coveralls to Daniel and back again, their minds struggling to reconcile the two realities. Evelyn Reed's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face. Her carefully constructed facade of arrogance and power shattered into a million pieces. She stared at Marcus, at the man she had insulted, threatened, and tried to humiliate. The man she had called a poor, clumsy laborer. The man who held her husband's company in the palm of his hand. No, she breathed, shaking her head in denial. It's not possible. It's a trick. It is no trick, Mrs. Reed, Marcus said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. He stepped forward, and the crowd parted for him as if he were royalty. I started this company to honor the principles of skill, integrity, and respect. Principles you have shown you hold in contempt, he stated calmly. The Reed Consolidated Contract contains a standard ethics and conduct clause. A clause which you, as a representative of your husband's company, have just violated in the most public and flagrant way imaginable. He held up his tablet, which now displayed a live feed from one of the security cameras. Her entire tirade, every insult, every threat, was playing back in crystal-clear high-definition video and audio. As of this moment, Marcus declared, his voice leaving no room for argument, our multi-billion-dollar agreement with Reed Consolidated is terminated. Effective immediately. For cause. The finality of his words struck her like a physical blow. She staggered back, a hand flying to her mouth. You can't, she pleaded, her voice now a desperate, pathetic whine. Please. My husband, it will ruin him. It will ruin us. You should have thought of that, Marcus said, his face a mask of cold disappointment, before you decided that a man's worth was determined by the color of his skin or the dirt on his hands. He turned his back on her, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. Daniel, he said. Please escort Mrs. Reed from the premises. And have our legal team contact Jonathan Reed immediately. Inform him of the contract termination and send him a copy of this recording. Right away, Mr. Thorne, Daniel said with grim satisfaction. He gestured to two large security guards who had appeared as if from nowhere. They moved to flank Evelyn. No. Please, she begged, her eyes wild with panic. She looked at Marcus's back. I'm sorry. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The guards took her gently but firmly by the arms. As they led her away, a disgraced, sobbing mess, she passed the silent, judging faces of the very people she had tried to impress. Her public humiliation was complete, but it was a humiliation of her own making. As she was escorted out of the pristine atrium and into the harsh light of the real world, Marcus turned to the assembled crowd. Let this be a lesson to everyone, he said, his voice resonating with moral authority. The value of a person is not in their bank account or their title. It is in their character. It is in the skill of their hands. It is in the dignity with which they treat others. He looked down at his own grease-stained hands. This, he said, holding them up, is not a mark of shame. It is a mark of honor. It is the mark of a creator, a builder, a problem solver. Never forget that. The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began again, louder and more heartfelt than before. 6 months later. The name Evelyn Reed was now only whispered in gossip columns as a cautionary tale. Her life had unraveled with breathtaking speed. Jonathan Reed, faced with the public disgrace and the catastrophic financial fallout of losing the Thorne contract, had divorced her in a matter of weeks. The scandal had triggered a vote of no confidence from his board, and he was ousted as CEO. Reed Consolidated, unable to service its specialized fleet and hemorrhaging clients, filed for bankruptcy 4 months later. Evelyn, stripped of her husband's wealth and ostracized from the social circles that had once defined her, now lived in a small, run-down apartment on the other side of the city. The diamonds and silk were gone, replaced by the cheap polyester uniform of a big-box retail store where she worked as a cashier, enduring the condescension of shoppers who had no idea who she used to be. She had lost everything, all because of a single afternoon of unchecked arrogance. Her punishment was absolute. Marcus Thorne stood not in a garage, but on a brightly lit stage in a newly constructed university auditorium. It was the inauguration of the Leo Thorne Memorial Scholarship for Engineering and Technical Arts. The $100,000 check from Evelyn Reed had been its first donation. Marcus, dressed in a sharp but simple dark suit, had just finished his keynote address. He spoke of the beauty of mechanics, the nobility of skilled labor, and the importance of giving opportunities to those who had talent but lacked resources. The incident at the garage had inspired him to take his mission a step further. He was no longer content to just run a business based on respect, he would now actively cultivate that respect in the next generation. The foundation would provide full scholarships and apprenticeships to underprivileged youth, giving them a path to a career they could be proud of. After the ceremony, he walked through the adjoining workshop, a state-of-the-art facility his foundation had built. He saw a young woman, no older than 19, struggling with a complex transmission assembly. She was frustrated, on the verge of giving up. Marcus walked over, rolling up his sleeves. "Having trouble?" he asked gently. The young woman looked up, startled to see the famous billionaire who had just been on stage. "Mr. Thorne." Yes. I can't get this gear to seat properly." Marcus smiled. He picked up a tool, his hands moving with that familiar, innate grace. "Let me show you," he said. "Sometimes you just need to feel it. Listen to what the machine is telling you." As he knelt down beside her, his suit jacket now resting on a nearby bench, he was no longer a CEO or a philanthropist. He was just a man who loved engines, sharing his passion with someone new. He was back where he belonged. The story of that day in the garage became a legend within the company and beyond. It served as a powerful reminder, narrated from boardrooms to break rooms. A reminder that true power isn't the authority you wield over others, but the skill you possess within yourself. It is a lesson about the quiet dignity of labor and the loud, self-destructive nature of arrogance. It proves, beyond any doubt, that you can never judge the engine by the grime on the chassis, for the man who looks the poorest may, in fact, own the entire road.